Welcome to this Candlelit lecture where we are going to be discussing Arthur Rimbaud, the great French visionary poet and probably the first surrealist in the modern sense of the word, and I would say the father, though I don't think he would like that title, but definitely an influence on many poets since from the surrealists to the Beat generation, including Bob Dylan and many more. So this day, probably a lot of you who are now in the live and who will be watching this at a later date. As always, thank you very much to everybody who came here on time. Isaac, Orna, Nathan, thank you very much. Punctuality is always appreciated on Nether Street. So, I won't bore you with the biographical details that you already know probably. He lived a very short life between 1854 and 1891, and his literary career was even shorter. It lasted 5 years between 1870 to 1875. Maybe a bit earlier if we count his school poems in Latin that won academic prizes. Now, let's dive in, I say, into his work. And I'm gonna read a poem that's very fitting for this hour. It's titled Evening Prayer, written in 1870 when Arthur Rimbaud was only just 16, but already a fully formed poet. I sit to life an angel in a barber's chair, a finely fluted beer mug grasped in my fist, a curve to its neck and belly, a pipe there, in my teeth air rank with impalpable mist. Like warm excrement in an old dovecote, 1,000 dreams inside softly burn. At times my sad heart like sapwood floats, blooded by the dark gold dripping urn. When I've drank my dreams carefully, having down 30 or 40 jars, I stop and gather myself to ease my bitter need. Gentle as the lord of cedar and hyssops, I piss toward dark skies and heavenly approved of by the giant heliotropes. So already he was 16 and a punk. This poem is very blasphemous. He mixes the profane with the sacred in something that in 1870 in France, which was very conservative environment, would have been scandalous. But what's interesting is that through his lyricism, he elevates the profane. He brings it towards the transcendent. And this is captured, I think, in this beautiful image of I piss towards dark skies, high and heavenly. And if we take into account that the color of urine is yellow, the contrast becomes beautiful. Golden stream of peace cutting through the darkness, and that's already an ars poetica, poetic art, a vision of the poet, of the poet's vision, the poet as seer, cutting with his gaze in the darkness. And this is very important to Arthur Rimbaud's poetical project, because he viewed the poet as a form of seer. For him, as Marcel Raymond, the writer of a very important book on French poetry, it's titled From Baudelaire to the Surrealists, highly recommended. Marcel Raymond remarks that Rimbaud was the first poet that tried to use poetry as not only a form of expression but as a form of metaphysical understanding of the world, of lyricism. And for Rimbaud, the poet had the duty of working upon himself, upon his own conscience, upon themselves. Rimbaud used himself, but obviously, that was a mark of his time. But a poet has a duty of working upon themselves to make their soul monstrous, Rimbaud's words, acting like a comprachico. And this word comprachico that Rimbaud uses is very interesting. It's based on European folklore, in which there were believed that there were these comprachico, these criminals that would abduct children and mutilate them to either send them out as beggars or display them in those theaters of curiosity as carnival freaks. And for Rimbaud, the poet has this duty to mutilate himself, and he described this process that is commonly known as the derangement of all senses. You've probably heard of it, but it wasn't something that happened without intent. Rimbaud described it in his words as a long, prodigious, and rational process. And he said that the poet had to look in them, in their souls, and find every form of love, of suffering, of madness, and through an unbearable torture in which they need all their faith and all their strength. They needed to reach in and gaze upon new horizons that and find new visions that might leave them mad, and in that madness that they would forget it. He said, the poet, has to go in the void, in the darkness, but it's not a guarantee that the poet will win. He might end up mad. He might end up either mad or dead. And in order to give form to the unspeakable, to the unnameable. I said, that's all right, because if you go there, if you reach that liminal space, somebody else will pick up where you left off. That was something that he described when he was just 16 in two letters that are known now as the seer letters. And he said that the poet had to be a seer. And Marcel Raymond remarks that for Rimbaud, the poet was not a mystic, but a magus. And it's interesting because although both mystics and magi have this process of inner work, the mystics want communion with a higher power, with God, goddess, nature, whereas the magus wants it all for himself. He wants to be changed. In certain occult traditions, obviously, I'm simplifying this. And what's interesting about Rimbaud is that he was a very pious child, and he, in his last year of life, he had communion. And in the Catholic tradition, that occurs after confession. So, in a sense, he died reconciled with his ancient faith. But still, even in his years of wandering, of revolt, he was a deeply mystical poet. He had a pantheistic sense, and this we can see in the next poem that I'll read, and it's called My Bohemia, a Fantasy. And it goes like this. I ran off, peace in my ragged seams. Even my overcoat was becoming ideal. I went, under the sky, muse, I was yours. Oh, what miraculous loves I dreamed. My only pair of pants was a big hole. Tom Thumb, the dreamer, sowing the roads there with rhymes. My inn, the sign of the great bear. My stars in the sky rustling to and fro. I heard them squatting by the wayside in September twilights. There I felt the dew drip on my forehead like a fierce, coarse wine. Where rhyming into the fantastic dark, I plucked like lyre strings the elastics of my tattered shoes, a foot pressed to my heart. Amazing. This is surrealism before surrealism. And it's something that's lost in translation. But when Rimbaud says that my stars in the sky rustling to and fro, the word that gets translated as rustling, the expression in French is frou-frou, and it's that sound of rustling, which was would have been very strange, especially back then, like the stars that when we think of stars, we think of a visual image. We see a visual image, and there's a Platonic thing, and the Pythagorean idea of the music of the spheres. But here the stars are rustling with a foo-foo sound, with the sound of cloth. And this great image of stars gets lowered down to the sound of cloth. And another image that is very dear to me in this poem is my inn, the sign of the great bear. And again, we have this image of the inn, of the wanderer through the European countryside, through the French countryside, would stop at inn that usually had the names of animals in them. And here is the sign of the great bear of Ursa Major. He forsakes civilization for the cosmos. And now, coming back to Rimbaud's biography, he lived in rural France, and he ran a few times from home before he eventually settled in Paris. He had a few attempts, but even before that, he would wander the countryside. He was romantic, and he probably did that to escape a familiar environment, a home environment that was very oppressive. His mother was the main parental figure in his life. His parents were separated, and his father was mostly absent in from his life. His mother was very domineering. She made him study a lot, and that's why he was well acquainted with poetry from a young age, because he was forced to be a nerd. He also was forced, or the only pastime that was permitted was playing the piano. So we already see an inclination towards musicality in his poem that's probably can be attributed to that. But again, his mother, that he described either as the mouth of darkness, the mouth of shadow, la bouche d'ombre in French, or he used an anglicized form. He called her la mother. He actually used the English word the mother. Yeah, he was not very fond of her. So she was probably she was most likely the one he was rebelling against. And also, like, we can return here to this image of light and dark. His mother was the darkness, and he was trying to find the light through poetry, through wandering. And I'm gonna read you another poem that's in the same vein from the same period. It's called Sensation. And here we see again synesthesia like in My Bohemia, but here we see that Rimbaud is really a poet that's not about doctrine so much or an idea, but sensations, about feeling, about trying to name the unnameable. Enough of me, let's hear from the man himself. Through the blue summer days, I shall travel all the ways, pricked by the years of maize, trampling the dew. A dreamer I will gaze as underfoot the coolness plays. I'll let the evening breeze drench my head anew. I shall say not a thing, I shall think not a thing, but an infinite love will swell in my soul, and far off I shall go a bohemian, through nature as happy as if I had a girl. So here we have this verse, I shall say not a thing, I shall think not a thing. And here we have this anti-intellectual almost stillness, this mystic idea that's very foreign to the European mind of not saying a thing, of being content in silence, which is something that a lot of meditative traditions, be they even in Catholicism, definitely in Orthodoxy, but there's this idea of finding God in silence, much more prevalent in the East. And here we have a young man, a young poet, trying to find this communion with nature. But it's interesting that he's not giving any guidelines. He's just saying, I will do that. He's very action oriented. He's not providing a guideline, or it's not definitely a manifesto. It's what he says in the title. It's a sensation. It's something that he wants to feel. Okay, I'm gonna take a small break to have a glass of water because my mouth is dry, and see if you guys are saying anything, you folk. Okay, so Rachel Victoriana says, geez, at 16 I just wanted to smoke some weed. I think Rimbaud, he also wanted to do that as well. I don't think it's one or the other. Oh, here is a very interesting idea from Isaac. Probably tired of thinking, being made to do it so much as a child. Yeah. That's definitely one way to read it. And there's this whole idea of intellectual vanity that's very very Christian, in a sense of relying not on your understanding. It's about relying not on your own understanding, but on God's understanding, but you just remove God and you basically get sensation. Now, well, Rimbaud, when he went to Paris, he entered the marking chapter of his life as a poet, and that's meeting Verlaine. He actually wrote to Verlaine, sending a few of his poems to him when he was still living at home, and Verlaine sent him money and invited him there. And he referred to him, "Oh noble spirit, come, we are waiting for you." And Verlaine was actually the one who promoted Rimbaud. When Rimbaud was in his 30s, he was in I think Algiers, if I'm not mistaken, but I can't remember right now. He was basically a merchant. He tried to be a gun runner, but not very successful. But when he went to Paris and met Verlaine, it marked both their lives. And Verlaine, who lived to be quite old, I think he reached his 60s or 70s, I'm not sure, but he was the one that introduced Rimbaud later to a wider audience through his series The Damned Poets. And he has this very beautiful introduction where he quotes a few of Rimbaud's poems, including the first one I've read tonight, Evening Prayer, along with Vowels, which I'll read now, and Drunken Boat, The Drunken Boat, which is one of Rimbaud's most famous poems and the one that best encapsulates his poetic project. We won't be reading it tonight because it's very long, and honestly, if I'm going to read it, it's probably going to be just by itself, because that's a whole discussion. But he also quotes Vowels. That's another of Rimbaud's famous poems, because it captures the idea of synesthesia. And here he talks about the vowels not only as symbols but as colors, textures, moods, visions. They become living presences. And here language stops being logical and becomes sensory. And here we have this idea of derangement of senses encapsulated. And enough from me, let's hear from Rimbaud. Vowels, poils in French. A black, E white, I red, U green, O blue. Vowels. Someday I'll talk about your secret birth cries. A black velvet jacket of brilliant flies that buzz around the stenches of the cruel gulfs of shadow. E candor of mists of tents, lances of proud glaciers, white kings, shivers of parsley, I purple, bloody saliva, smiles of the lonely with lips of anger or drunk with penitence. You waves, divine shadows of viridian seas, peace of pastures, cattle-field peace of furrows, formed on broad studious brows by alchemy. O supreme clarion, full of strange stridencies, silences crossed by worlds and by angels. O the omega, violet ray of her eyes. Well, here we have poetry as an act of perception. And it's interesting because how he takes us from the void, which is A, to O, which is omega, and it's the infinity. And we go from the black A, which is a black velvet of brilliant flies, to O, violet ray of her eyes, and eyes here is capitalized, and it's probably a reference to eternity. And we have these images that try and succeed at times of encapsulating the human experience. And it's interesting because vowels, if I'm not mistaken, many linguists believe that the number of vowels across all languages is limited. We only have I, O, E, as we say in Romanian. Like we can't make new vowels through the mouse, but through our mouse as they are right now. Probably, like if we evolve in millions of years, who knows. But right now, apparently, it's limited. Still, through our senses and through pushing our senses, we can create new images, new worlds with just a limited number of vowels. And here we have Rimbaud doing what he set out to do, which is become a seer and reaching new vistas of reality through the derangement of the senses. And it's obvious why Verlaine loved it. It's interesting that this poem, despite being so surreal and so novel in its approach, it still has the form of a sonnet. And that's the thing with Rimbaud. Rimbaud was a master of all the classical forms, but then he started innovating. And this is very obvious in his final two works, The Illuminations and The Season in Hell, in which he combines the prose poem and very simple very simple poetic structures, in which he basically reduces his poems to the sound of simple songs that become very musical and almost childish. Or childish is not necessarily something bad. Like I know why I had to say almost childish. They become childish in their sounds, but they hide the very, very profound insights. But here we have very young Rimbaud, who's still being, in a sense, a good student of the form, but inside the structure, he's creating chaos. But Verlaine, who famously said that the poet should twist the neck of rhetoric, had an influence on him. And I'm going to read you a poem from his later period, from his final period, which many commentators believe that it's about Verlaine, but still, as all good poems, it's about so much more. And this one is called "O Seasons, O Castles." Though, and here I have to make a remark. Probably somebody if somebody knows it, leave it in the chat. So a lot of translators here in the English-speaking world, they translate it as "O Seasons, O Chateaux," which is the French word for castle. And like I always wonder, why is that? Because I don't think that the rhyme, is preserved through that, and it's just like putting a French word where an English word would serve just as well. I know that's at least my my reading. But in the meantime, let's read, and I'll catch up with the chat after that. O seasons, O castles. O seasons, O castle, where is the flawless soul? O seasons, O castle, the magic study I pursued, of happiness none can elude. O mate live each time, the Gallic cock makes rhyme, nothing else I desire, it's possessed my life entire. That charm, it's taken heart and soul, scattered all my efforts so. Where's the sense in what I say? It makes the whole thing fly away. O seasons, O castles. And this poem also has another version, a later version, and in which there's another verse added, that goes, the hour of its flight, alas, will be the hour I pass. O seasons, O castles. And here we have Rimbaud compressing a crisis, an existential crisis, into a little song. And we have the symbol of the seasons and the castles. And season, it's the impermanence of nature, the ever-changing force of time and the cyclical force of time, and then we have the castles, which are man's attempt at immortality, at legacy, perseverance, endurance in time, civilization. But here the poet reflects on the fragile, magical pursuit of happiness. And it's very interesting that in the American Constitution, man is guaranteed life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Happiness is not guaranteed. The only thing that we have a right of, according to the founding fathers, is the pursuit of happiness. If we get it or not, that's left for debate. And I think it was Aristotle that said that happiness, true happiness, is such a fragile state that if you realize you're happy, you lose it. And there's also a line in True Detective spoken by Woody Harrelson characters, Marty, the everyman in a sense. Matthew McConaughey was playing a nihilist detective, very cynic guy, and he had this everyman, flawed everyman partner, Marty. And he remarks that the paradox of the great years, of the good years, is that when you're living through them, you don't realize. And I think this is this, in a sense, is the reflection that, you know, happiness is fleeting, and if you look too much at it, you lose it. And yeah, the conclusion here of the poem is that joy cannot be possessed or held. It can only be pursued. And one thing, you know, that really made me obsessed in this poem, regarding this poem, was the image of the Gallic cock makes rhyme. Oh, may it live each time the Gallic cock makes rhyme. And it's this image of renewal. But it's very interesting that we have the Gallic cock, a symbol of France, intruding in an otherwise escapist poetical project. Okay, you guys have been pretty active. Let me catch up a bit and have another glass of water. Rimbaud is making me very thirsty. I don't know what's up with that. So, Misty Violet says, the way the images shift, the way sounds shift with the shape of the tongue. Yeah, no, that's very interesting. Very interesting observation regarding vowels. Now, coming back to vowels, I have to mention that you know, I never agreed with Rimbaud's reading of the vowels. I think I studied this poem in school when I was 16, and my late literature teacher, Mr. Leishman, God rest his soul, he had this introduction to symbolism, to international symbolism, in which vowels was quoted in its entirety. And I was thinking to myself, you know, like, let me go back a bit. I was like, you know, you was never green for me. I was like, why is you green? You know, like that never made sense. And I for me was never red. If anything, it was white. If anything, E should be green. And yeah, that's at least my reading. Curious to hear what you guys think. What colors do the vowels have for you? What's your synesthesia like? But yeah, great observation, Misty. Okay, Ornaros is leaving. Thank you for dropping by. So, walk by faith, but not by sight, could be considered anti-intellectual, says Isaac. Requires a quiet mind. Good points you make. Nah, good points you make. I was just riffing on them, Isaac. So, Haley, the Moonlight Bard, says that in the Declaration of Independence, it's life, liberty, happiness. In the Constitution, it's life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. I know why I had this idea of the pursuit of happiness, probably because of that Will Smith movie. Great correction, Haley. So yeah, it's maybe they took out happiness and said pursuit of property. So yeah. Oh, so Igor Vorona, echoing the Daco Futurism project, says that I look a bit like Traian with my haircut. Yeah, it's a very Roman haircut. I didn't comb my hair on purpose because I wanted to let it a bit loose today, in honor of the teenage rebel, Rimbaud. Yeah. Although he has a verse from A Season in Hell, a line that says that I will I comb my hair with fat like my Gallic ancestors, or my Celtic ancestors. Yeah, I comb my hair with fat, with animal fat, like my yeah. So maybe when I'm going to read at a later date, when I'm going to read to you guys, to you people from the Season in Hell, a bit from that selection, I probably will comb my hair with animal fat. I actually have pig fat from my mother-in-law, lard. Yeah, so I'll comb my hair with lard. So coming back to the Declaration of Independence, Haley says that the Declaration of Independence is more well known and the two are often confused, and it's often cited as a key example of how the politics of slavery affected the foundation of the country. Now that's very interesting. I'll definitely have to research into that pursuit of happiness thing. Where does it come from? Because over here in Romania, it was always the pursuit of happiness. Like, you ask anybody who thinks they know American culture, myself included, and they'll say pursuit of happiness. So I'm wondering if there's some psyop going on. But yeah. So coming back to Rimbaud, Misty Violet says that the colors do seem like a bit of nonsense. Well, yeah, maybe it's nonsense to you, to us. For Rimbaud, it made sense. Like we have to make uh, our own sense. Create our own vowels. Like that was the project. That was Rimbaud's poetic project. And before I read the last poem of the night, I'm gonna say something very interesting about Rimbaud. He had a very short literary career. And I said into a note to Justin Patrick Moore, we had a discussion about Rimbaud, which actually I think it prompted me to do this lecture. And I said that I believe that Rimbaud, had he lived for a bit longer, he would have started writing again. I said that maybe poetry, but I definitely believe he would have started again. I don't know why, it's just my feeling. But still, the poetic project of 1870 to 1875, in my opinion, is completed. It has the size of a small book. It's usually, something like this, very thin book. But he said to do everything that he wanted to do. He wanted to reach that eternal feeling and find new meaning, reach new vistas, and he did that. He deranged his senses, he lived to the maximum, he traveled with Verlaine a lot, until their separation that ended quite badly, with Verlaine shooting him in the arm, Verlaine going to prison, and Rimbaud then writing The Illuminations and A Season in Hell, or no, A Season in Hell and then The Illuminations, and quitting literature altogether. But there's also an episode of Rimbaud lunging at Verlaine with a knife during an argument. So there is also that, like Verlaine gets painted as the bad guy in the relationship sometimes, but Rimbaud was no saint, as it was obvious. But he had a longing for something more, and we see this in one of his last poems that's titled Eternity, L'Éternité, which is the eternity. It's definite. It's the eternity, not an eternity, the eternity. And it goes something like this. It has been found again. What eternity? Is the sun free to flow with the sea? Soul on watch, let whispers confess of the empty night, of the day's excess. From the mortal wheel, from the common urge, here you diverge to fly as you feel. Since from you alone, embers of satin, duty breathes down with no at last spoken. There's nothing of hope, no entreaty here. Science and patience, the ordeal is real. It's found, we see. What? Eternity. Is the sun free to flow with the sea? So yeah, here we have Rimbaud completing in a sense his artistic project. He tried to find what could not be spoken, eternity. And this is something, and it's something that I didn't remark until reading Octavian Soviani's translation of Rimbaud's poems. Octavian Sovian is a Romanian poet and translator of Verlaine, Baudelaire, Rimbaud, and I think a few others, but he's mainly known for them and obviously for his own work. And Octavian Soviani makes a very interesting observation, and saying that Rimbaud, he spoke in his poems with universal subjectivity, like it's a subjective voice, but you can't tell exactly who's he speaking. And this is very obvious in Eternity, which starts with it has been found again, and it's also translated it's found we see. And it's interesting because it's the French word here is retrieve. It's been found again, it's been retrieved again, it's been recaptured. So this eternity thing is something that was lost, but recuperated, found. And then appears the question, somebody asks, what? And then there's the answer, eternity. So there's a dialogue, and there's this feeling of many voices, but there's also unity. And we have this unity of opposites, with the sun free to flow with the sea. Water and fire combine in motion, in fluidity, in flux. And there's soul on watch, let whispers confess of the empty night, of the day's excess. And then we have the empty night and the day's excess. Yin and yang, emptiness seeking excess, excess seeking a place a vessel to be deposited. And it's interesting that Rimbaud the rebel, the revolutionary, the punk. He speaks of duty breathes down. So after all his rebellion, eternity is linked with duty. Duty to what? It's up for interpretation. The more conservative Catholic French exegetes of Rimbaud's work, including his brother-in-law, like to read this poem as Rimbaud's reconciliation with his Catholic faith. Obviously, that's one way to read it, but there's also this torture, this ordeal, la supplication, as the word is in French, which can mean torture, but like when you say torture in English, you think about torture as punishment, but here is torture as ordeal, as a trial, as a painful trial. And he says that in eternity, torture is real. This feeling, it's duty and ordeal, but there's also freedom and motion. So and there's also here things that there's also this verse that's translated in English as no entreaty here, and the verse actually in the original is null orietur, which is actually Latin. And as I said, Rimbaud was very knowledgeable of Latin, and orietur means birth, point of origin, dawn. But here it's no origin, no point. This is the point of no origin. The zero, in a sense, fullness. So yeah, it's a very strange poem, like all of Rimbaud's work, all of his life, in a sense, because after all of his trials as a poet, he gave it all up and became a gun runner, an adventurer. As Octavian Soviani calls him, Romanian is a vântură lume, which it's a very nice expression. It means so vântură, it sounds like wind, so it's wind walker of the world. It's it's this image of the wind blowing through the world, so he becomes like a wind blowing through the world. A globe trotter, I think, would be the best translation in English, but it doesn't capture that image of the wind that I really like. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. I'll see you on a live next time when I'm going to be discussing with Rachel Victoriana, Addiction in Fiction, but we're going to be returning to Rimbaud. And I'm not exactly sure, and here I would like to hear your input, if we should read A Season in Hell, or maybe read some of his more Victor Hugo poems, his poems more in the style of Victor Hugo that dealt with revolutionary France. Mind you, Rimbaud was present at the Paris Commune in the 70s during the fall of Napoleon III, and he captures some very interesting images of Paris, some grotesque images reminiscent of Baudelaire. Or if you want us to read and discuss A Season in Hell, let me know in either here in the comments. I'll ask again in a post, either in the chat or through a text post. Now let's see what you people have been saying, and with that I'm off because it's really late here. So coming back to this image of property and happiness, Isaac says it's because Americans confuse property with happiness. It's not just Americans right now, it's the whole world. And Misty Violet says, undeniably beautiful, even if it's a bit inaccessible. I think that, yeah, Misty, beauty is fundamentally inaccessible, and I agree with that thing. You know, if you look too much at something and try to dissect it and rationalize it with your mind, you lose it. Now, Isaac, coming back to eternity, he says, maybe duty in the general sense. We like to talk about rights all the time, but rights can't exist without duty to preserve them. We never talk about duties in a escapable relationship with rights. We just talk about rights. Yeah, that's, I definitely agree. Rights imply duties, and obviously, you know, if other people have rights, we have the duty to respect them. So yeah, you can't have rights without duties. Great point, Isaac. Haley recommends us a book, The Constitutional Convention and George Washington and the Rise to President. And it's called The Return of George Washington, Uniting the States, 1783 to 1789, by Edward J. Larson. And it's a Pulitzer Prize winner for history. Okay, so everybody have a good night. Thank you very much for tuning in. It was a lovely discussion, and I'll see you next time. And I'll definitely see you in a post, or you'll see me in a post, and we'll see each other on notes. Much love, Fane.